So we have lots to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a while since you've been on the show by yourself.
That's right.
I think it's been years.
The last time we did this, we were on a Zoom call.
Yeah. I wonder if that's pre-pandemic. I think it was pre-pandemic. It was pre-pandemic. So it's been a while. And I think at that time you were closing in or at around 300 rent-to-own deals.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share what you are today?
We're over 500.
Over 500. And that people do that all the time, right? There's lots of rent-to-own companies that do 500 deals.
I don't know exactly, but from what I know, we're probably in a league of our own.
Yeah. And for the listeners' benefit, like I've been around for a bit, and I can, there's lots of them that did not make it past 2 years, right? There's all these people that say, I'm going to get into rent-to-own, and they get going. I don't even know the reason why a lot of them don't last. Can you explain what you do different?
Well, I think we approach it from a why it's important point of view for us, first and foremost. And I think there's a lot of longevity in understanding why you're committed to a strategy. For us, the purposefulness is really meaningful. It was never about the profits. It was always about the purpose. And the profits were just a big icing on the cake. And that continues to be how we operate. We lead from a place of making sure we're doing it with integrity and we're helping every player that's in the mix. And there's a few players. It's not just the home buyers that need the rent-to-own process. It's, of course, the investor family that's helping them. But then there's other, peripheral people. There's real estate agents in the mix. There's mortgage agents, accountants, lawyers. There's a whole, whole ecosystem of people. And we operate from a place of integrity, and we always lead with education. And we came into this place actually to educate people on what rent-to-own is and what it can do. And, I'm just impressed in how organically it grew into something much more meaningful and something more impactful, where over 500 families have used this process to get into homeownership. I'm honored to have been part of that journey for them, and it feels good. So you want to keep doing it over and over again.
So I'm going to ask you if it was the chicken or the egg. So were you already a real estate investor and something went sideways that you felt you had to pivot? Or did you start with an education program that taught you a bit about rent-to-own, and that's how you started?
So we started, I think, like many investors, completely in the dark about what real estate investing is really about. As far as I knew, you buy a rental property and you collect rent and you do your best not to have tenant and toilet issues. And that's the extent of real estate investing. But then we went to a Rich Dad, Poor Dad seminar, and we learned that real estate is much more widespread than that, and rent-to-own is just one of the strategies within the umbrella of real estate. So we started learning a little bit more about what it is, and truthfully I was originally turned off. That's the kind of the big secret. I was turned off by the rent-to-own idea because everything I read indicated that it was it was a good strategy, but only 50% of the people that went into the rent-to-own process successfully exited. Right. And that bummed me out.
That was the statistic they shared? Interesting.
That was most investors that were dabbling with rent-to-owns. That was the statistic that they had given us. And I decided, okay, well, I'll learn a little bit more about the ins and outs of it before we really decide whether it's going to be something that makes sense for us. So we started by trying to find reasons not to do it and of course learning from other people. So I met a guy that actually had done over 20 rent-to-own deals, and I wanted to learn the ins and outs from him. And he also was consistent with some of the other people that only 50% of the deals materialize and have a successful outcome, but it's really lucrative when they fail. And that seemed to be kind of the recurring sentiment from everyone that was involved in rent-to-owns. And that really didn't sit well with me. So I think
because if you told the tenant up front, there's only 50-50 chance you're actually going to own the house after all this, after you give me the option deposit and you pay the above market rent, I don't think many of them would go for that deal.
Exactly. And me as an investor, I didn't see what was the point of going through this entire charade only to have a 50-50 chance at helping somebody actually leverage the strategy.
Right. And achieve homeownership.
Yeah, and when they don't leverage the strategy properly, that's also, I could smell hassles and headaches on the other side, right?
You could be sued.
Exactly. And I just thought that's not what we want. Neil, as you know, my husband is super risk averse. He's like, I can't sleep at night knowing we're putting people into an arrangement where they can be out of house and home and we're on the receiving end of profits relating to that. So,
because they'd probably be pretty upset.
Yeah. And
I mean, the tenants too, other than yourselves, the investors.
And one of the most established investors in this space back then, like we're talking, around 2009, I call him the grandfather of rent to owns. He stood up in a room where he and I were presenting on stage together, and he said, listen, after you've done about 50 rent to owns, expect to get sued. And I'm like, we've done 80 rent-to-owns and there hasn't even been a hint of being sued. Mm-hmm. So our model was very different from the get-go. And that's actually what was like the deciding factor for us. If we could close the gaps and reduce that 50-50 variance and increase the success rate, then we're going to give this a shot.
Right.
And that was really our entire motivation, is just to fix what wasn't working with rent to own, approach it a little bit differently. You know what they say, that, you don't have to reinvent anything, just modify it by 5%.
That's all it took?
And you can get a big shift in the results. And yeah, I wouldn't say, it's hard to quantify that it was 5%.
I don't think it's 5%.
Maybe it was 15%.
Because I know you guys put a lot more effort into this.
We did put in a lot of effort. And I owe a lot to Neil. My husband is an amazing numbers person, and he really drilled into the numbers and he identified where the gaps were. And you want to know what the biggest gap, why rent-to-owns weren't working in the past, and maybe why so many people abort rent-to-own after they've only tried it a few times, is because understanding what it's going to take for that home buyer to qualify for a mortgage at the end of the rent-to-own process takes a certain element of curiosity, of course, dedication, and expertise. And most people focus on, how do I get people into the rent-to-own process? Whereas we were focused on, well, how the heck are we going to get them out? And getting them out takes into account, what can they truly afford? What will it take for them to qualify for a mortgage? And just that simple perspective shift changed the dynamics of how the rent-to-own deal was put together and ultimately translated into a 90% success rate.
Right. So 90% success rate, meaning the tenant buys out at the end of the contract.
90% of the time. So 9 out of 10 home buyers that go through the process complete the process and get their own mortgage.
What was you say 5%? I think it's more than 5%. But what was the 5% that you tweaked the process to get them from 50% to 90%?
So the big thing was we started with their affordability. And when I talk about affordability, I'm not just talking about, well, what do they make and how much home can they afford to buy in today's real estate market. We started stress testing home buyers back in 2009, when the word stress test wasn't even a thing. The banks hadn't even introduced that. And we were thinking, okay, well, we need to make sure that these home buyers can afford the rent-to-own property, even if interest rates go up. Because when they exit the rent-to-own process, we don't know exactly where the interest rates are going to be, but we know that they're going to be higher. So we started processing their affordability using a higher assumption of interest rates and interest payments. And if they can handle that, well, then they can handle what we're throwing at them today. And that was a big shift. And then the other big tweak that we made was the support that they get while they're in the rent-to-own process. So most investors jump into rent-to-own because of the allure or the assumption that it's a set it and forget it approach. Right? People love the fact that you have home buyers that are renting. They're going to handle all maintenance and look after the repairs. Yeah. They have some down payment money locked in there. This is great. Well, the misnomer is that you don't need to worry about managing the property, but you do need to manage the people. And that's what we did differently. We managed the people. And by giving the people the guidance and giving them the support and teaching them what they needed to do to overcome some of their barriers that caused them to have to go the rent-to-own route, paid off in dividends for them and for us.
So can you describe some of the process, the support that you give these tenants? Like, I already know because I've talked to you and Neil when we're not recording, But for the listener, like, how do you help them along the way?
Well, there's definitely the end goal is established at the beginning. So we understand what it's going to take for them to be successful in the rent-to-own process, and what it'll take for them to qualify for a mortgage. And that's established at the beginning. And once we know what the roadmap is, we know when to bring in the mortgage agent. And, the rule of thumb is the sooner the better. And do regular check-ins with the mortgage agent. And basically every check-in, they're building on a different aspect of the credit repair process. Or they're paying down debt or settling collections items, and somebody has to check in on their progress. That just, consistent checking in over the course of a 2 or a 3 or a 4 year rent to own makes all the difference, because the home buyers are motivated. They're willing to do it as long as they're guided on what to do.
Right.
And that's really what we're doing behind the scenes.
And it's probably missing in most processes.
I would think so.
Right. Because these tenants often got themselves into trouble. They probably need some help getting out of it, right? Definition of insanity, keep doing what you're doing and keep getting what you get. So they have to do something different.
Exactly. And
people they're receptive to this?
Well, they're uncomfortable with it. I think anytime you're trying to change habits, especially bad habits.
Pay my bills on time? Yeah, come on.
What is this nonsense? Yeah, absolutely. And then you remind them, what are the stakes? Right? If you don't pay your bills on time, that $30,000 that you put into this rent to own, it's not refundable. Do you want that? We have to put things into perspective for them throughout, various challenges, and they hit potholes all the time. A lot of these tenant buyers have family members who might fall sick and they need to send money overseas, and they forget about their own bills. And then, when we're noticing these types of things percolating, because we're doing regular check-ins, we can jump in and say, hey, what are you doing? You can't be doing that, because you're doing that at the expense of your ability to get into home ownership. Find another way to solve, some of the other challenges. Tap your, relatives that might be able to step in to send money overseas while you're focused on your home ownership goals. Just being that voice of reason makes all the difference, and they listen.
Take care of yourself before you try to take care of others.
Yeah, put on your own oxygen mask before you start, giving somebody else one.
Yeah, don't give someone else money when it means you might lose your home.
Exactly. And it's hard because they're choosing between paying their own bills and sending money home to support, a relative in need. I understand the emotional conundrum with that. I completely get it. But at the end of the day, if their goal was to get into home ownership and we committed to helping them get there, we will continue to put that into perspective for them. And they really do value that. And, the gratitude and the tears and the emotions and the joy that it brings to people is just, there's nothing like it. It's very addictive. And that's why we keep coming back for more. 12 years of it. Right. We can't get enough.
Just to give the listener an idea, how many rent-to-owns are you entering in a month? And then how many are you closing in a month? As in like handing the keys over to the tenant, like for the last time.
Well, in a month, there's a lot of things happening. It's not just people entering the rent-to-own process. We also have people exiting the rent-to-own process. So there's constant kind of ebb and flow. It's not really a hard, fast number because we're at the mercy of what's happening with the inventory on the market. How often can home buyers actually go out to look at properties in their price point? And it's seasonal. During the summer months, they're preoccupied with, being at the cottage, vacationing with their relatives, so they're not getting out as often, so that affects the deal flow. And then when they're back to work in the September, October, fall season, then it comes in like gangbusters, and then it peters out around the holiday season, and then of course reactivates around the spring season. So it's constantly ebbing and flowing, and the intensity of the ebbs and flows, it can be anywhere from 3 deals in 1 week to 5 deals in 1 week, depending on what's happening with the real estate market in the season.
So it's busy.
It can be.